first thing we want to do to get the Bootstrap framework installed is we want to go here to its main page and just click the download button. And when we do that, we are going to go to the first section here, compiled CSS and JS. JS is the JavaScript files that go along with this. There's a lot of JavaScript built into this, and you don't have to really know how to use JavaScript in order to use the JavaScript components it provides. And you'll see how that works later, but go ahead and click the download button and it will download Bootstrap, in this case Bootstrap 5.13 distribution .zip. Once we get that, I've already downloaded it onto my desktop. You can right click on it and extract all the files, and it extracts into a folder. And let's look inside that folder. So here's the folder that comes with Bootstrap, and you can see it has two subfolders. There's a CSS folder and a JavaScript folder. We're going to need some files out of here for our Bootstrap site. In the CSS folder, you see lots of different CSS files. Okay, so the main one is bootstrap.css, and that's the one we're going to be using right now. But there is also bootstrap min.css, which let's take a look at those. I'm going to open Bootstrap. Okay, and here's what's in Bootstrap's CSS file. And you can see it is 11,266 lines long. And it is just full of classes and formatting for all the different elements you might have on your website. So these are all built in, and we're going to learn how to use a lot of these classes. We will never use all of them. So that's the CSS it provides for you. We'll see how to incorporate that into our web page in just a few minutes. You can scroll through there and look at it if you want to. But you really don't need to. You don't have to understand what all the formatting is once you understand how they name things. So we'll take a look at that in a little bit. I also want to look at the bootstrap min.css. And this is the exact same file as the Bootstrap CSS. Let me scroll back to the top of this file. And then we'll compare it to the minimized version. So this is the exact same contents, except we've done something that you normally don't want to do as a coder, is we've removed all of the spaces. So there's no spaces, there's no line breaks. It's just crammed in as tight as it can possibly get. Okay, the browser doesn't care when it interprets it. It's not really human readable at this point anymore, but it does save a lot of space. So if you go back here and look, the original file is 201 kilobytes. The minimized version is only 161 kilobytes. If you realize that when people load your web page, it may not seem like a huge difference, just 40 kilobytes basically, but every time they load that CSS file, it's another 40 kilobytes, another 40 kilobytes. So minimizing it will make your page load faster, be more efficient. Okay. So there's other versions in here. The RTL ones are for people who are coding websites that might be in a language that is written from right to left. RTL is right to left. They have versions here. Here's the Bootstrap, just the grid components if you only want to do the grid layouts. Here's the reboot component. If you only want the reboot component, you can just use that file. Here's just the Bootstrap utilities. We want everything, so we're going to use bootstrap.css once we get to it. Let's look in our JavaScript folder. Inside our JavaScript folder is bootstrap bundle.js. That's the one we're going to use because bundle puts a couple things together. It puts all the Bootstrap JavaScripts are contained inside it, but it also adds something called popper, which we'll learn more about later. You can load those two things separately. There's a way to do that, but we just want to have everything available to us. So we're going to use the bootstrap bundle.js. Notice it's 205 kilobytes. It has a minimized version. It's only 77 kilobytes. So you need both of those things for Bootstrap to work. You need the JavaScript file and the CSS file. You have to load them on your page. We'll see how to do that in a minute. Normally, I develop using the full version of the file. That way, if I want to look something up in there, it's at least human readable. If I need to look through it for any reason at all. When you're all done, though, you substitute the minimized version, and at that point, you've just saved some bandwidth on your server. And if you're paying for the bandwidth on your server and you have a very popular website, it could be a substantial savings. So what do we do with these files? So we have a CSS folder and a JavaScript folder, but we only need one file out of each of those. But I do like to keep my CSS and my JavaScript organized. So I have a Bootstrap demo folder. I'm putting it on my desktop for this development. It doesn't have anything in it yet. Okay. So what I'm going to do is in my Bootstrap, in this folder where I'm going to keep my website, okay, I'm going to do a new folder that's going to hold my CSS. So we're organizing our web files now. And another new folder that's going to hold my JavaScript. Okay. And out of the CSS folder in Bootstrap that they sent us, I want my bootstrap.css file, so I'm going to put it in there. And out of the JavaScript folder of the download, I want the bootstrap.bundle.js, and I'll put it in my JavaScript folder. So my JavaScript folder has the JavaScript file. Any other JavaScript I want to use on my web page, I'm going to put it in this folder. My CSS has my bootstrap.css. I'm going to, while I'm here, let me make a new text document, and I am going to make my style.css. This is the place where if I want to add styles to anything on my website, I'm going to put them in this file. I am not going to change this Bootstrap CSS file ever. If a new version or an improvement or a bug fix comes out to bootstrap.css, I can just replace this file with the new version. But if I've made edits to this file, I'm going to have problems if I replace it. So it's better to put our styles in this other sheet. We'll load this one first and then load our style on top of it. That's why the C stands for cascading, right? Anything we put in this file will override any settings that are in the Bootstrap file. So I'm going to have two CSS files in here. All right, so how do we get them on our web page? So this is my demo folder. I am going to just right click on here and I'm going to say open with VS Code. You can go to VS Code and go to open folder if you want. This is a nice quick shortcut. And here is my VS Code, and you see it already has my folder open. I can see my CSS folder and my JavaScript folder. I don't have an index file here yet. So we'll do that. Let's create our index file. So I'm going to right click here and say new file. I'm going to say index.html. And now I have my web folder, or my web file. And I need to do something to start with for my web page. If I hit the exclamation point, we can take advantage of the Emmet abbreviations. And I am just going to hit tab, and it fills out a skeleton of a web page for me. I get my doc type, I get my HTML tag, my head section, my body section, they're all there. So in my page, if I'm going to use Bootstrap, I have to load two files. I have to get my CSS file in there, and we do a link to do that. So I'm going to do a link, and notice my Emmet. I didn't actually type the tag. I typed link, and my Emmet abbreviation comes up, and so I want to link to a CSS file, and it gives me the link. It fills out the rest for me and saves me from having to type. I put my style sheet in a CSS folder, so I'm going to type CSS and I put slash, and I called it my, and look, it even is looking and it knows I have in that folder mystyle.css, so I can do that, fixes my formatting, everything for me. So there is the link to my style sheet. But I also said we need Bootstrap in here. So let me do that again. Link, CSS, and I am going to tell it to look in my CSS folder. This time it's going to look for bootstrap.css. Okay, so I load my Bootstrap CSS first, then my personal custom style sheet for my website is going to go right there. If you're not going to customize anything and you're just going to use the stuff built into Bootstrap, you do not need this second one. I almost always do something at some point, so I just load them from the beginning. The other thing we need is a JavaScript link. We need to get our JavaScript loaded. The proper place to put JavaScript is at the end of your body. It needs to be the last tag before the end of your body, because JavaScript, the page loads from top to bottom. And if you load your JavaScript early in the page, if it's a lot of JavaScript, it can slow down the display of your page. So we go ahead and we put everything about our page will go up at the top. The last thing before the end of our body is where we will load our JavaScript file. That way, if it takes a few seconds or even 10 seconds or 20 seconds, the rest of the page is loaded and the user can start looking at it, even though the JavaScript isn't quite all there yet. It makes your page look like it loads faster. So to put in a JavaScript file, you need a script command. And fortunately for us, Emmet has abbreviations for those. If I just type script, there's one that says a source, and we're going to need a source. We need to tell it what script we're going to use. Okay. Our source was in our JS folder, slash, and there it is, bootstrap.bundle.js. So this is all I need to get Bootstrap installed and running on my website. Now we can actually start coding and start looking at some things that Bootstrap does for us.